Well, thank you, all of you, and I'm very grateful for the invitation tonight. And there's some of you I know, and I've had a chance to speak on Cape Pearl and also with Congleton a couple of times. I'll give you just a quick idea of my background. I went to a Presbyterian church in Fresno, California as a teenager, and we did exchanges with the Church of Scotland. And I got to know a lot of Scottish kids, and when I got my degree in communication, I thought, well, I better go work somewhere where they speak English. So I went over to Scotland and worked for a couple of years doing marketing on food research, mostly taste testing, which is the best part of food research. And I realized that my mother's company would work very well there, and she had a little company in Fresno called the Brownie Baker, and I did the same thing in Scotland, and it did extremely well because the British have an incredible sweet tooth. And so we launched brownies, carrot cake, chocolate chip cookies in Great Britain. And in fact, I actually received an award at one point from Margaret Thatcher for business enterprise, which was really exciting. My dad came over to see that one. And she was I never liked her persona. She was always kind of stiff and rigid and snooty, but in person she was extremely warm. And that teaches me something, that sometimes the way that people look isn't really who they are, and that was a helpful thing to learn then. And I didn't vote there because I couldn't, because I wasn't a citizen, but I did vote here. I continued to vote here. Finally had a son, and his dad and I decided that we would prefer to raise him in California, where we had family, and also didn't really want to send him to the UK schools because it was either bad public schools and bad private schools, or good private schools, but maybe not how I wanted to raise my child. So we came back. My mother was living in Grover Beach at the time. And after a while, I realized that with my experience in business and a degree in public relations, I probably could do a lot for Grover Beach. And so I started on the Planning Commission. I was a real estate agent at the time. I'm a broker now. And worked my way up, got elected to the city council for 4 years. And while I was on the council, because of my business background, because I can read a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement and cash flow, and because I had been trained to know what questions you ask when you sit on a board, and I'd been trained by one of the chairmen of a large British bank, a large UK international bank, and he obviously had some good finance background, and he taught me what to watch for and the questions to ask. The truth is, it's not rocket science. It's more like the smell test, and as long as you can read a little bit of financials, you can usually figure out the smell test, and even if you can't, often you can see it. And while I was sitting on about 16 committees over the 4 years on the city council, I noticed that the boards didn't seem to know their roles and responsibilities. They didn't hold the CEO responsible. They didn't work with him on the vision of the agency. And basically, the person calling the shots was the CEO. And it was the tail wagging the dog. And all I could think was, well, maybe we're just a small county and people haven't had the big city experience, and we're just kind of provincial out here, and maybe that's what's wrong. But I knew that they were wide open for corruption because of that. And of the 4, I would say I managed to do some good in, well, I probably did some good in all of them, but we managed to turn around a couple of them. And one of them got turned around because there were 3 women who had been CEOs who could all see that what we were looking at was nonsense. And the 3 of us got together, and we made enough noise with the other members that they kind of had to go along with us, and we turned that one around. And I'm really, really tickled about that. The other one was our Chamber of Commerce, and it was run by a lovely blonde with very long hair and longer legs, and the guys they didn't watch anything except her. And she started putting invoices in the drawer, and about 6 months later, we were $38,000 in the hole. And so we were rescued by the Arroyo Grande Chamber of Commerce and joined them, but Grover lost their chamber, at least their individual chamber. And So that one kind of got turned around. And the woman who turned it around was actually one of the women who turned around one of the other boards I'd worked on that was a government board. The other two were the Air Pollution Control District, which didn't succeed with, and the South San Luis Obispo County Sanitation District. And you probably know that the kind of carry-on that went on at our sewer district went on at other sewer districts and is still going on in water and sewer districts. And I write about that in the book, but my main focus for writing the book is because I know that it gets changed by people who pay attention. And it's not about, voting is great. It's not just about a vote. It's not about marching. It's not even about campaigning for your favorite person, because once they get in there, you've got to watch what they do. And you've got to make sure that they're representing you, and you've got to make sure that they know their roles and their responsibilities and that they are taking them, and that you are there at the meetings, and you guys are very good at that. And I hand it to you, and I have huge respect and gratefulness to you for that. But you've got to be there at those meetings. You've got to read the agendas. You've got to pay attention. You've got to listen to people, what people are saying, and think it out and figure it out and hold their feet to the fire. Because the other side of that, that's kind of the negative side. The constructive side is, if you're not there telling them what it's like on your street where you live, how do they know? They don't live on your street. So the only way your elected representatives can actually represent you is if you go tell them how you need to be represented and how you want to be represented. And so moving on then to mayor, I ended up being the first directly elected female mayor of Grover Beach. And at that point, I could take care of a problem that one of the other former mayors had alerted me to 4 years earlier. And that was the problem at our sewer district. When he told me about it, I tried to sort it out, but our mayor, John Scholes, was hanging on to it, and he would not let go. And to this day, I think he still has his people in there, protecting whatever it was that went on there. And some of it I know, some of it I don't. What I did at that time was I started reading everything that was out there, watching the meetings, and I was just stunned by what I found, because the numbers didn't lie. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd think, this can't be true. This can't be true of my little county that I love, and I didn't want to believe it. And a lot of times, I know the guy who told me about it, the former mayor, said, Debbie, I just don't want to believe this. And the numbers didn't lie, and I kept going back to the numbers, and it took me a long time to get those numbers. I had to fight to get the accounts for a public agency. It was very hard getting them out of the chief executive at the time. And so that's when because I'd had the business experience and had done some management consulting for startup businesses and manufacturing businesses, I was in a really good position just to do a red flags audit. So I did a red flags audit. All the things that had been concerns about the agency from the various people who'd written reports, and the ones that had been addressed, but more importantly, the ones that weren't, and then taking their accounts and just flowing them 1 year to the next so you could see what was happening 1 year to the next, because they never reported from 1 year to the next. So you had no idea what was going on. And that was when I really found out what was going on. They probably spent $1.5 million in legal fees in about 5 years. And this is for a little agency that had revenues of $3 million. And so it's $3 million a year, but it was about $400,000 a year on legal fees. And it goes on, and you can read about it. And actually, that's part of the reason I wrote the book. Sometimes people would say to me, well, Debbie, what's the problem? What's so wrong about all of this? And I never even knew where to start, because there was so much of it, and it's complicated. And so so I was the mayor. I found all this stuff. I asked everybody I knew if they knew a good forensic accountant. out of the county, and no one could find anyone. So then I started asking all my friends, only good friends, friends from college. And one of my friends married a guy from South Carolina who worked at Caltech down in Pasadena, and he said, "Debbie, I think I can find someone to help you." And I thought, really? But the daughter of Carl Knudsen worked with him. And Carl Knudsen is the guy who solved the money laundering and actually coordinated the money laundering from agencies across the United States with the federal authorities in Los Angeles to bring down the Colombian cartels. He did it. And he's this mild-mannered man. You would never know it when you met him, and that's how good auditors are. You don't know it. They seem harmless. And they ask you questions and you have no idea. And I managed to, he also brought down Oliver North and the whole gun trading, gun dealing thing. So he did those too. And he's renowned across the country and probably the best in the country. He's retired and is now doing his own investigating for people. And so I got his cell phone number and I talked to him, and I convinced him that he needed to look at things. So let me put this in perspective for you. Every once in a while, and that was 10 years ago, but I'd say over those 10 years, maybe 3 or 4 times, I've had a call from Carl, and he's been livid, just livid, because of what he's seeing in this county. And I'm stunned, I'm still stunned that here's this guy who brought down these huge, horrible situations of corruption, and he's really, really angry about what he sees in this little county. And that puts it in perspective for me. It's bad news, and we need to do something about it. And so I wrote the book, because I got to the stage, and we did turn that one around, but the bad guys kind of stayed in there to protect their interest. And finally in 2019, I ran for office against Adam Hill, who most of you have heard of by now, and I didn't expect to win, but I did want to keep my platform out there. So I ran against Adam, and decided when I didn't win that I would go back to the city council, because maybe I could still do something. And so I sat on the city council from 2016 till 2019, and that was when they were bringing in cannabis. And the city of Grover Beach, the city council, the city hall is not corrupt. It was the council that was corrupt. And they only chose people to get permits for dispensaries who had felony convictions on the part of their principals. And they did not choose the people who I really wanted to see in town running businesses in my community. They did not choose the ones who cared about medical cannabis. They did not choose the ones who had clean backgrounds. They did not choose the ones who lived in Grover Beach. And there were 4 of those that I would have been proud to have had as businesses in my community. They chose the ones with the felonious principles. And one man stood in the back the whole time, back of the room, and controlled the whole thing from start to finish. And they wrote the ordinances. At first they sounded really good, then they all kind of got changed a little bit, so that basically they could choose anybody they want and nobody could do anything about it. And then they went ahead and ignored most of what they'd done anyway. And that's why I say it's one thing to vote, but it's another thing to go watch what they do and make sure that if they vote to do something, that they do that thing they voted to do. They don't just vote for it and then ignore it. So it got to the point where everything, I don't like the all or nothing statements, but I can honestly say that almost everything that came up on the agenda, it would be skewed in some way. Perhaps they weren't telling you what was happening in communities around you so that you could make kind of a reasoned look at things. They would only tell you what the council majority wanted to see. There would be all kinds of ways that they would skew issues and not really give you the whole picture. And I got to the point where there was simply no point anymore in being one person among 5 people that could never win a vote and did not have the time of day to go up against every single thing that came up. And so I decided that my time would be better spent if I quit and said why I had quit, which I did, and I said that, and I had it from very, very good sources. I said that I had heard from about 6 different cannabis companies that you had to pay $100,000 to the mayor to get a dispensary in Grover Beach. And sure enough, that's exactly what the FBI put out in their press release a few months ago. I guess about over a year ago now. And it was all correct. Everything I said was correct. And it was all happening the way I was saying it was happening. And so I just decided that I couldn't sit there and vote on things when I knew that every single thing that came before me was skewed in some way. And I couldn't really give it my blessing by pretending there was something, that this was normal process, because it wasn't normal process. It wasn't good process. So I quit. I said why. And I thought my time would be better spent writing this book. And it was a really hard decision to quit. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, because I don't quit. And I felt I was letting down the people who'd voted for me, and I knew they elected me because they knew I would speak on their behalf. And so that was hard. That was really hard. But the response I got wasn't what I expected. I thought I was going to get beat up, because I'd been beat up a lot of times, and I was sure the Tribune was going to beat me up, and they didn't, which really surprised me. None of the press beat me up, and in fact, I had about 200 people writing to me, emailing me, coming up and hugging me, texting me, phoning me, more than any other issue I've ever gone up against. And I've gone up against some really big ones, like the dust rule down and trying to get rid of the 4x4s in the dunes. And I was really shocked by that. And same thing with this book. I thought I was going to get beat up again, and it's just been exactly the opposite of that. And it makes me feel really good, because I know that most people out there really care, and most people out there really are good and do want things done properly. And there's one thing we can all agree on. It doesn't matter what party we're from. We all want honest government. We just want to be represented by the people we elect to represent us. And for me, that was the most touching thing. And that's why I'm so grateful to be here tonight, because I'm a Democrat. And I really, really respect you for asking me to speak. Thank you. And of course, I come from a family of Republicans, so I love Republicans, many, many of them. But I think the thing that struck me most of all when I had the launch for my book was that the people in the room could not have been more different from one another. They were different. They were different everything. They were different religions. They were different ages. They were different sizes and shapes. I mean, there was really nothing that any of us had in common, except that all of us wanted honest government, and we had worked really hard together to get it. And it brought us together, and it made us a village. And there's so much truth. It really is. It takes a village, and a village is full of people who are different, but who care about each other. And so my message really is, and the reason I wrote the book, and I started it with the Sleaze, because the Sleaze gets everybody's attention. And so once I have everybody's attention, and not just here locally, but I'm looking at a national level, if we have everybody's attention, and I can say to them, we are a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and you are the people. We are the people. And it's our government. We own that government. And so if we hate the government, we're hating ourselves, because it's us. So we've got to get out there and pay attention and understand it and own it, because it belongs to us. So that's my message, and I want to equip people to do that. And so I have a couple of books that follow on. So if I get people's attention, I have a training course and a couple of books that follow on. They're not out yet, but they're on the way. And And that's why I wrote it, just to see if there was something I could do, because I had reached the end of the line politically. Our town was owned by Helios Dayspring, literally owned by Helios Dayspring. So that's really my story, and I can, what time is it? I know we had till 7:15, so I don't want to go over. 7:20? Okay, so I can stop now, but if folks have questions, if you have time.
10 minutes of
Debbie, were you a part of a few years back, the takeover of a little church on Newport Avenue by, your eyes just rolled. My dear friends live next door, Gail and Robert Downey. They have since moved to Texas. I wonder why. But at any rate, they had litigation for like a year or two. And so you know something about that. The scam is that a group comes in, somehow takes over a church without consulting with the members who know nothing of what's going on, and they shut the church down, turn it into private enterprise. And in this case, it was a homeless shelter, right, without talking to anybody in the whole neighborhood.
Or the church.
And, well, no, yeah, I'm saying it. Somehow they just pull the wool over the eyes. I don't even know how it worked, because I don't have a corrupt mind. It doesn't think that way. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes is the answer to that. I went to that little church for a few years. And so I knew some of the leadership in the church and was very friendly with them. And I believed, even after I'd been lied to on the same issue in the past, I still had this mindset I was going to believe my police force. And they had been telling us that on Grand Avenue that there's no problem with the homeless, there's nothing that goes on, but 3/4, and they reported this every 2 weeks in the Next Door Neighbor app, 3/4 of the crime that went on was associated with the transient population, and it was causing terrible problems for the businesses. But when it came that they wanted to do homeless showers and some things down there, what they said, what they reported was, oh no, there's no problems. And they did exactly the same thing up there. And I'm a real estate broker, and I knew the lot and I knew the property, and I actually thought it was probably going to be a pretty good spot for that. And they were looking for housing for young people. It wasn't transients. The problem was they were housing transients in the evenings, and so there were the same problems. There were needles everywhere. I didn't know that, because the police department, and I believed them, said, and this is why I quit, the police department said, oh no, there's no problems here. And as soon as, and then one day I got asked by one of my former church-going friends, would I come out and value her mother's house? And I went out there, and she said, Debbie, we had no idea. They had no idea. And it's exactly as you said. So, yeah, I know about that. Someone else asked me about that today.
Debbie, can you explain in some way why there is such a severe homeless problem in Grover Beach, and yet in Arroyo Grande we see relatively no one on the streets?
Because we're at the beach, and it's easy to hide and camp at the beach. And I think it's that as much as anything. Beach towns often have the problems. But you know, there's another reason, and it's kind of secondhand, but it's not direct, but I think probably about 30%, in various ways, not all one way, but in various ways, we probably lose about 30% of the money that we give to our government to look after for us here in this county. And when I would go to meet, and I would meet people from other counties, they would talk about their rehab beds and their mental health beds, and I'd say, what? Because we didn't have any rehab beds or mental health beds. We've got a few now, but 95% of the homeless population were there or have already either rehab or mental health or both issues. And mental health beds and rehab beds aren't going to fix homelessness, but they will help. But they'll also help those of us who have family members who shouldn't have to be shipped off 2 counties away where we can't take care of them. And even Adam Hill had to go 2 counties away to get rehab care. And that is just, it's literally criminal. It's so unfair to cause that level of suffering when it's not necessary.
Hi. Thank you so much for writing your book. And I was wondering what kind of feedback you've gotten, or do you know if there's been further investigations of corruption in our county because of the book? Because you really put it right out there. Thank you so much.
Well, that's a good question because that was one of my goals. One was to get people engaged. The other goal was to, when you can't win because you're fighting a good fight against bad people, sometimes you have to either shame them or shock them. And so this book is the shock. Nobody knew it was coming out. But I'm hoping that it will also just act as a little bit of a prod to the authorities to stay on it and not let go of it. And the authorities higher up also. We've got the FBI in, and honestly, I don't know how high up it goes, but I know that they are. I've heard in the last month or so that people are still being interviewed. I've heard from people who know of people being interviewed. And so I do think they're on it, and I do think there's more to come. And I wrote about half of what I know in this book. Some of it I just couldn't write for all kinds of reasons. But since then, I'd say about a third more has come up, because people have called me and told me things. And they've said, oh gosh, Debbie, now that I read that, I just put 2 and 2 together, which is what happened to me. I finally had enough knowledge and relationships that I started connecting the dots.
Yes, you're touching on the Grover Beach Police Department denying the homeless situation. Why? Are they getting a kickback from somebody, or what's the deal with that?
Because their police chief is employed by the city manager, who's employed by the city council, and they all want to keep their jobs, so they will please the council majority, and the council majority wanted to do those things, and so they wrote the reports in such a way that they could get away with approving it. And yeah, I did want to say one other thing on that too. In civics classes, they don't teach you that the Constitution says nothing about local government. There's nothing in the US Constitution about cities. And I think, and I think most of us think, I hope I'm wrong, but we think that we have a government where the three branches balance each other, and so we've got checks and balances, and that keeps everybody honest. There are no checks and balances at the city level, because the city council is everything. They hire the chief of police, who controls everything. There is no judiciary really at local level. They hire the city attorney, who does whatever they want because they hire him. They hire the city manager. So the executive is completely hired by the city council. There's no checks and balances, and that's part of the reason it all goes haywire. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
No, we're here for you. I just thought it was funny. I just wanted to interject there that a while back we were having everybody scream and yell about defunding the police and how the police are so horrible, and these city councils were standing up going, the police is horrible. Didn't they hire the police chief? Aren't they the ones who can just say you're fired?
Yeah, it's kind of like us saying our government's horrible. Well, excuse me, who does it belong to?
Yeah, so, okay, right.
It's okay. It's our policy. That's fine. Debbie, I haven't read your book yet. You're talking about the sewer districts. Has anything happened with these groups that were running sewer districts in these different cities and the corruption? Has anything come of that?
Very little. John Wallace was, Dan Dow did convict him of misdemeanor conflict of interest. He was charged with felonies and misdemeanors, but he plea bargained. And there are some things now that the Public Corruption Unit is investigating with San Simeon, and I think maybe it's San Miguel also. But the thing to watch right now is the water. Watch the water. Look at who puts in all of the systems, both commercial and private. Who does all the water studies and then puts in the systems because the study says there's plenty of water. And who, in other words, who owns it? Look at that. It's really, really important for our future.
Do you have a name?
John Wallace.
The Wallace Group.
The Wallace Group. And I'm not saying that the whole group is corrupt, but he's the one who he owns it. He's the primary shaker and mover on every single water system and sewer system that goes in, every line, every pipeline. He's on all the boards. He does all the water studies. And if you have that level of control, you control.
Hi, Debbie. What division or department, if any, was responsible for vetting these felons?
For vetting what?
The felons that you speak of that were running the marijuana industry.
The city council was responsible, but they wrote it in such a way that they could say, oh, they're suitably rehabilitated to run a business in our community. Clearly they weren't, because now Helios Day Springs in jail.
Was there any process through the sheriff's department that could have stopped that?
No. The sheriff's department actually did go in and to a different one, 805 Beach Breaks, and they had some issues with some bad dope that was being used that wasn't licensed. And the city police department just said, oh no, we're not going to investigate that. Yeah. George.
Debbie, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you. You are not a quitter. You did not quit. And in fact, you've done one of the most important things, and that was to document history so it doesn't get forgotten for our children to repeat.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are we good?
Any more questions? We can take two more. Okay, Joanne here. Oh, time's up.
Well, if I have to stand up. I haven't read your book yet because I don't need to read books. My husband, Dr. Bruce Jones, reads me all kinds of things and tells me everything about all the news every morning, you know. So one thing that's in your book that people might not understand about, you talked about some things in Kansas City, Missouri, and the Pendergast group. I grew up in Independence, Missouri, and my uncle ran against the Pendergast group for mayor of Independence, and the FBI came to him and told him that there was a contract out on his life. And they didn't ever do anything about that, I guess. The bad guys didn't do anything about that. But I just wanted you to know that that's kind of a
Thank you. I'd love to compare
verification
notes.
of your books.
It took me a really long time to find out what was happening because 3 weeks before my mother died, she said, you know, my parents were trying to fight the bad Dems in Kansas City, because I would always go talk to her about the bad Dems. And she said, I was just a little girl. She said, but they actually got together and formed a separate political party, and they got the bad guys out, and they put in a good mayor, and they've had good mayorship ever since. They've had a few glitches, and I write about it in the book because my grandfather was the head of the Republican Party in Kansas City. But I lost my train of thought there, but it took me a really long time. I had to wait for the internet to figure out what really happened because my mother died and she couldn't remember anyway because she was just a little girl and they didn't really talk about it. But it's amazing what people did. And I do write about it because it's really inspiring. But what was his name? Paul Roberts. Paul Roberts. Thank you for that.
Is this the last one, Jason?
We got two more. This is a Sissy 2.0.
I'm just curious. Has any of the $11 to $13 million that turned up missing from either the South County Sanitation District or the Sewer District been recovered?
He had to pay back $60,000. Now, it could have been, possibly, because actually the RICO Act, the Racketeering racketeering and corrupt organizations. Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations Act, which was put together to take down the mafia and people like Pendergast, is now being used against government organizations, and Stu Jenkins has successfully used it on a few occasions now. We could have done that as the people, but we just were worn out.
I find it hard to believe that Adam Hill was the only supervisor that was being enhanced by this. I don't think he was that smart to start with, but it seems to me that there must have been others.
Well, if I'd been asked who I would vote for on the last Congleton show, and I'm glad I wasn't, because I didn't want it to go political, because I want to be heard by more than just one or two parties. I want to be heard, and because the message is too important to get hijacked one way or the other. But I would have voted for Dr. Jones. And I would have said that publicly.
Thank you, Debbie. We're not sitting down.